this special event. No further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Carmencita, who's going to do our traditional land recognition.
Good morning, everyone. We will begin our vigil by acknowledging that we are meeting on Aboriginal land that has been inhabited by indigenous peoples from the beginning. As settlers, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Long before today, as we gather here, there have been Aboriginal peoples who have been the stewards of this place. In particular, we wish to acknowledge the ancestral traditional territories of the Ojibwe, the Anishinaabe, and in particular, the Mississaugas of the New Credit, whose territory we are gathering on today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. We recognize and deeply appreciate the historic connections to this place. We also recognize the contributions of Métis, Inuit, and other indigenous peoples have made, both in shaping and strengthening this community in particular, and our province and country as a whole. As settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of indigenous people must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities, and in particular to bring justice for murdered and missing indigenous women and girls across our country.
The National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women, marked every year on the 6th of December, is a time to reflect on how violence affects women and what our communities can do to end violence against women. Established in 1991 by the Parliament of Canada, the day commemorates the anniversary of the 1989 gender-based murders of 14 young women at L'École Polytechnique de Montreal. In Canada and around the world, violence against women and girls remains a serious challenge. It impedes women's full and equal participation in public life. It causes short and long-term damage to women's mental and physical health. It hurts families and all of society. The violence faced by women in Canada is of a different scope and severity than that faced by men. Women are more likely to experience violence at the hands of male partners or family members, whereas men are at greater risk of violence from acquaintances or strangers. Women are at greater risk of certain forms of violence, including intimate partner violence, sexual assault, and criminal harassment, including stalking. Women are more likely to experience domestic violence of severe nature, which includes being sexually assaulted and beaten, living through chronic incidents of violence, and being threatened with a gun or a knife. Violence affects women of all social, economic, and cultural groups. However, certain groups of women, such as Indigenous women, are at a greater risk of victimization. Indigenous women, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit women are more likely to be targets of violence than non-Indigenous women. During this time, and always, we remember and reflect on all missing and murdered Indigenous women. This year, Canadian unions are working to specifically address gender-based violence in the workplace. Violence and harassment are a daily reality for far too many workers in Canada. The #MeToo movement has demonstrated how gender-based violence, including sexual harassment, remains a significant barrier for women, transgender, and other gender diverse workers. Canadian unions are calling for the government to action to prevent and stop violence and harassment at work. This year's theme #DoneWaiting aims to question, call out, and speak up against gender-based violence together with survivor advocates. You are encouraged to organize awareness campaigns in your workplace to help make a meaningful difference. Please remember that meaningful actions does not end after these 16 days. It needs to be continuous effort throughout the new year and beyond in order to make significant impact. While we observe the 6th of December as a time to reflect, we also use it as a reminder to continue the fight to end violence against women. Women are done waiting. Thank you.
That's great. So at this time, we're just going to read the names and a short history and bio of all of the victims of the Montreal Massacre victims. So there are people in the audience here who have the name and a rose to symbolize and honor the life of the victim. These are all the 14 women victims. Tyler will then place a white rose to symbolize the support and alliance of men who are also standing up against violence against women. After all the roses have been placed, we'll just take a minute of silence to reflect and honor these women, and that will conclude our ceremony. So I'm just going to take this bugging me. So I'll just read the name, and whoever comes up, if you can just place it on the table. So the first is Anne-Marie Lemay. She was in 4th year of medical engineering. Anne-Marie Edward loved outdoor sports like skiing, diving, and riding, and was always surrounded by friends, and she was studying chemical engineering. Annie St. Arnaud, she was a medical engineering student from Latuque, Quebec, a Laurentian pulp and paper town in the upper St. Maurice River Valley. She lived in a small apartment in Montreal. Her friends considered her a fine student. She was killed as she sat listening to a presentation in her last class before graduation. She had a job interview with Alcan Aluminum scheduled for the following day. She had talked about eventually getting married to the man who had been her boyfriend since she was a teenager. Annie Turcotte, she was in her 1st year and lived with her brother in a small apartment near the university. She was described as gentle and athletic. She was a diver and a swimmer. She went into metallurgical engineering so she could one day help improve the environment. Barbara Degnaud was to graduate at the end of the year. She was a teaching assistant for her father, Pierre Degnaud, a mechanical engineering professor with the city's other French language engineering school at the Université de Québec à Montréal. Then there's Barbara Kwicznik-Widacz-Witz, a 1st year nursing student. She arrived in Montreal from Poland with her husband in 1987. Geneviève Bergeron, 2nd year scholarship student in mechanical engineering, played the clarinet and sang in a professional choir. In her spare time, she played basketball and swam. Hélène Colgan was in her final year of mechanical engineering and planned to do a master's degree. She had 3 job offers and was leaning towards accepting one from a Toronto area company. Maryse Lagnier, the only non-student killed, worked in the budget department of the engineering school and had recently married. Maryse Leclerc was in 4th year metallurgy, had a year to go before graduating and one of the top students in the school. Acted in plays in junior college. The first victim whose name was known and she was found by her father, Montreal Police Lieutenant Pierre Leclerc. Maud Havernick, a 2nd year student in metallurgical engineering and a graduate in environmental design from the Université du Québec à Montréal. Michelle Richard was a 2nd year metallurgical engineering, was presenting a paper with Havernick when she was killed. Nathalie Croteau, another graduating mechanical engineer. She planned to take a 2-week vacation to Cancun, Mexico with Colgan at the end of the month. And Sonia Pelletier, the head of her class and the pride of Saint-Ulrich, Quebec,
her remote birthplace in the Gaspé Peninsula. She had 5 sisters and 2 brothers. She was killed the day before she was to graduate with a degree in mechanical engineering, had a job interview lined up for the following week. And then Tyler, if you mind placing a rose for all the men who are supporting the ending of violence against women. Thank you. And now we'll just take a minute of silence to reflect and honor. Thank you.
Thank you.